From BBC Learning English, this is Learning English from the News, our podcast about the news headlines.
In this programme, Sudan war called world's worst humanitarian crisis.
Hello, I'm Neil.
And I'm Pippa.
In this programme, we look at one big news story and the vocabulary in the headlines that will help you understand it.
You can find all the vocabulary and headlines from this episode, as well as a worksheet on our website, bbclearningenglish.com.
So let's hear more about this story.
Paramilitaries, that's unofficial armies, have declared a rival government in Sudan 2 years into the civil war in the country.
The war has been described by charities and aid agencies as the biggest humanitarian crisis in the world today.
More than 12 million people have been forced to leave their homes because of the war, and charities say 30 million people in the country need aid, such as food and medication.
Let's have our first headline.
2 years of war in Sudan, a devastating combination of record displacement and dwindling aid. That's from the UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency.
That headline again from the UNHCR. 2 years of war in Sudan, a devastating combination of record displacement and dwindling aid.
This headline is about the problems impacting people living in Sudan because of the war, such as displacement, which is where people are forced to leave their homes.
We're interested in the word dwindling. So what does it mean if something is dwindling, Pippa?
Well, if something is dwindling, it's gradually becoming smaller or less frequent.
Yes, so the headline is talking about dwindling aid. This means the amount of money and help for Sudan is gradually getting smaller.
Here, dwindling is an adjective, but we can also use the verb dwindle. For example, you could say letter writing is dwindling. People don't do it as much anymore.
We often hear the word dwindling in news stories when we're talking about something that is getting less attention.
For example, you might hear about dwindling support for a politician or dwindling hopes of finding survivors after a natural disaster.
We've had dwindling, gradually getting smaller or less common.
For example, the company's dwindling profits are worrying for investors.
This is Learning English from the News, our podcast about the news headlines. Today we're talking about the humanitarian crisis in Sudan after 2 years of war.
The civil war in Sudan has left lots of people facing hunger and having to leave their homes.
It's also been very difficult for journalists to report on what's happening in the country.
And our next headline is about this. This one's from BBC News. Sudan's years of war. BBC smuggles in phones to reveal hunger and fear.
That's Sudan's years of war. BBC smuggles in phones to reveal hunger and fear. And that headline from BBC News.
This headline is about the situation in Sudan, and it says the BBC smuggles in phones. What does that mean?
Well, smuggle is a verb, and it means to take things or people from or to a place secretly.
So in the headline, BBC smuggles in phones, this means the phones have been taken into Sudan secretly. This is because many journalists have not been allowed to access places where the war is happening, and so the phones have been used by local people to tell journalists their stories.
We most commonly hear the word smuggle in news stories about crime. So, for example, drugs and weapons can be smuggled in or out of a country.
In the headline, smuggle is used not to talk about a crime, but to show that journalists had to keep their actions secret.
And we have a word for someone who smuggles, and they are called a smuggler. And we commonly hear about drug smugglers and also people smugglers.
We've had smuggle. Take things or people from or to a place secretly.
For example, the bank robber smuggled in a gun under his coat.
This is Learning English from the News from BBC Learning English. We're talking about the humanitarian crisis in Sudan 2 years after a civil war in the country began.
Earlier this week, politicians gathered at a meeting in the UK to talk about the war in Sudan and its impact on local people.
The UK's Foreign Secretary says he wants to find a pathway to peace, a way to stop the fighting in the country.
And our next headline is about what might happen next in the war.
This headline's from Semaphore. Analysis. Sudan has an opportunity to turn the corner on war.
That headline again from Semaphore. Analysis. Sudan has an opportunity to turn the corner on war.
We can tell by the word analysis that this headline is looking in more detail at the story and its impact.
Yes, and we're interested in the phrase turn the corner on.
Yes, if you literally turn a corner, maybe when you're driving, you change direction.
And if a situation turns the corner, it metaphorically changes direction. It improves or makes progress.
So in the headline, Sudan has the opportunity to turn the corner on war. It's saying that Sudan has a chance to improve the situation in the country and end the fighting.
We can say that something has turned the corner, or we can turn the corner on something, like in the headline. And we can also say turn a corner.
The phrase turn the corner is commonly used in news stories about serious situations that seem difficult to change, but where things have improved or are improving. But you can also use it in everyday speech. For example, my friend's daughter was really badly behaved in school, but recently she's been much better. She's really turned a corner.
We've had turn the corner, improve a situation.
For example, the country's really turned the corner on youth unemployment. Lots more young people are finding work.
That's it for this episode of Learning English from the News. We'll be back next week with another news story.
If you've enjoyed this programme, try our Learning English for Work podcast, which can help you improve your English at work. You'll find the latest episodes at bbclearningenglish.com.
And don't forget to follow us on social media. Search BBC Learning English.
Bye for now.
Goodbye.